Have you ever looked at someone and seen only their uniform, their job title, their station in life, and thought you knew their whole story? Have you ever dismissed the person mopping the floors, stocking the shelves, or answering the phones, assuming their potential was as limited as their role? What if you were wrong? What if, beneath a quiet surface and a humble job, there was a story of discipline, courage, and power you couldn't possibly imagine? This is a story about what happens when the invisible become seen, and the underestimated reveal who they truly are. It began in the gleaming, sterile hallways of Innovate Dynamics, a place where ambition was currency and people were judged by the height of their office floor. Down on the ground level, where the polished marble reflected the expensive suits of those who walked upon it, worked Maya. To the hundreds of employees who hurried past her every day, she was little more than a ghost in a gray jumpsuit. A push of a cart, the squeak of a mop, the quiet rustle of a trash bag being replaced. She was background noise, a necessary but forgettable part of the corporate machine. Her hoodie was often pulled low, casting her face in shadow, and she never made eye contact. Her movements, however, were anything but forgettable, if one had only bothered to look. There was an economy to her motion, a precision that was almost military. When she wiped down a conference table, it was with 3 swift, overlapping strokes that left no streaks. When she lifted a heavy box of discarded papers, her posture was perfect, her core engaged, lifting with her legs in a single, fluid motion. She didn't just clean, she restored order with a quiet, focused intensity. This precision was a language, but in a place like Innovate Dynamics, no one spoke it. They spoke in profit margins, in quarterly reports, in stock options. They saw her hands, covered in thin, latex gloves, and never imagined those same hands had been trained to dismantle a weapon in the dark, to apply a tourniquet under fire, to be instruments of both salvation and destruction. Maya was a former Navy SEAL, a member of one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. But that life was a ghost she was trying to outrun. Here, in the anonymity of the night shift, she sought silence. She sought peace. She wanted to trade the thunder of helicopters for the hum of a floor polisher, the weight of a rifle for the handle of a broom. She believed that if she could make herself small enough, invisible enough, the echoes of her past would finally fade. She didn't count on the fact that some places have their own kind of war zone. The glass towers of the city were a different kind of jungle, with predators of a different breed. The entitlement and arrogance that festered in the building's upper floors were a sickness, and it was beginning to spread. Maya, in her silent observation, saw it all. She saw the subtle cruelties, the casual dismissals, the way power was wielded not as a tool, but as a weapon against the vulnerable. She saw the way the ambitious young executives, slick in their tailored suits, would leave their coffee cups inches from the coaster, a small act of defiance that said, "Someone else will clean this up," and as she wiped away the rings of condensation, she felt a familiar, cold knot tightening in her stomach. The world, it seemed, was determined to remind her that bullies existed everywhere, from dusty villages on the other side of the world to the pristine corridors of corporate America. She just wanted to be left alone, but she was beginning to understand that in a world full of noise, silence itself can be a revolutionary act, and sometimes, the quietest people are forced to make the loudest statements. The predators of Innovate Dynamics moved in a pack. Their leader was Chad, a junior vice president whose ambition was outstripped only by his arrogance. He walked through the office as if he owned it, his voice a permanent, booming declaration of his own importance. He was flanked by 2 others, Kyle and Brandon, who mirrored his sneer and echoed his condescending laughter. They were the kind of men who believed their expensive education and their nascent titles gave them dominion over anyone they deemed beneath them, which was nearly everyone. Their cruelty was casual, a sport played to alleviate the boredom between meetings. One morning, they cornered a young intern from the mailroom, a nervous boy named Tim, who had accidentally delivered a package to the wrong department. Chad snatched the tablet from Tim's hands, scrolling through it with a look of theatrical disdain. "Is this really the best we can do?" Chad announced to the OpenPlan office, ensuring he had an audience. "My nephew could organize a delivery route better than this, and he's 7, Tim's face flushed a deep, painful red. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was a typo on the manifest, I can fix it. Chad tossed the tablet back onto Tim's chest, forcing the boy to stumble. Don't just fix it. Try not to be incompetent. It's not a good look. Kyle and Brandon snickered, and the trio moved on, leaving Tim trembling with humiliation. Maya was wiping down the glass partition nearby, her back to the scene. But she had seen it all in the reflection. Her hand, holding the squeegee, paused for a fraction of a second. Her jaw tightened, a small, almost imperceptible flex of muscle along her cheek. She saw the other employees quickly look down at their keyboards, pretending not to have noticed. This was the culture: see nothing, say nothing. To interfere was to draw the fire onto yourself. It was a form of cowardice she recognized, the same bystander effect she'd seen in conflict zones, where ordinary people allowed atrocities to happen out of fear. Here the stakes were lower, pride instead of lives, but the principle was the same. Meanwhile, miles above them in his penthouse office, CEO Arthur Harrison was fighting a different kind of war. He stared out at the sprawling city, but he didn't see the beauty. He saw a battlefield of commerce, and he was losing. A rival company had just undercut him on the massive Phoenix project, a billion-dollar government contract that was supposed to be his company's crowning achievement. They hadn't just been outbid, they had been outmaneuvered. The rival knew their exact proposal, their proprietary technology, their bottom line. There was a leak. A mole. Someone inside Innovate Dynamics was selling them out, and his multi-million-dollar security team had found nothing. The pressure was immense. The board was restless, his reputation was on the line, and the company he had built from the ground up felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He was a man adrift in a sea of data, surrounded by smiling faces he could no longer trust. He felt a rising tide of frustration and paranoia. Every employee was a potential traitor. Every friendly greeting felt like a lie. He was the king of a castle whose walls had been breached, and he didn't even know where the hole was. He was so focused on the enemy without that he had become completely blind to the enemy within, the rot of a toxic culture that he, in his detached pursuit of success, had allowed to fester right under his nose. Arthur Harrison slammed his hand down on the polished mahogany of his desk, the sound echoing in the cavernous, silent office. On his speakerphone, his head of security, a former FBI agent named Morrison, was delivering yet another report filled with maybes and possibilities but no concrete answers. "We've swept all executive offices for bugs, Mr. Harrison. Nothing. We've monitored all external data transfers. Nothing that falls outside normal parameters. We're running background checks again, but frankly, we're chasing shadows." Harrison cut him off, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Shadows? Morrison, we just lost the Phoenix project. That's not a shadow, that's a billion-dollar crater where our future used to be. Our rival knew our bid down to the last cent. That information didn't just walk out the door. Someone carried it." He paced the length of the room, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. He felt a profound sense of isolation. He had built this empire, hired every single executive, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was surrounded by vipers. His gaze fell upon the bustling floors below, visible through the reinforced glass. He saw a sea of heads, hunched over desks, moving through hallways. They were his army, but there was a traitor in the ranks. He felt an overwhelming urge to break through the glass, to descend into the trenches, and find the source of the rot himself. "Forget the protocol," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "I want you to pull everything. Financial records, phone logs, emails. I don't care about privacy, I care about survival. Find me something." He ended the call without waiting for a reply and stood, staring down at his company. He had become disconnected, a general directing a war from a remote bunker. He hadn't walked the main office floors in months, preferring the sanitized environment of the executive wing. Maybe that was the problem. He had lost the pulse of his own organization. He made a decision. He would walk the floors. Not as the CEO but as an observer. He would watch and he would listen. He straightened his tie, smoothed his suit jacket, and stepped out of his gilded cage, descending in the private elevator. As the doors opened onto the vibrant, noisy expanse of the main workspace, he felt like a tourist in his own country. He offered tight, distracted smiles to the employees who looked up in surprise. He walked past rows of cubicles, past the break room, past the conference rooms. And he walked right past Maya, who was emptying a recycling bin into her large canvas cart. He saw her, but he didn't see her. She was part of the scenery, a function, not a person. A gray shape in his peripheral vision. Had he looked closer, he would have seen the way her eyes, shadowed by her hood, tracked the subtle currents of the room, the way she noticed the nervous glances, the forced smiles, the entire social ecosystem that he was utterly blind to. He was looking for a sophisticated spy, a master of digital espionage. He never considered that the key to his kingdom's betrayal might be found in the casual cruelty he was about to witness. The break room at Innovate Dynamics was a testament to the company's self-image, sleek, modern, and stocked with expensive coffee machines and organic snacks. It was also, frequently, a mess. Chad and his cronies treated it like their personal frat house lounge. They were gathered there now, laughing loudly as they recounted a supposed triumph in a recent meeting, their voices echoing off the polished concrete floors. Chad, leaning back against a counter, finished his latte and, without looking, tossed the paper cup towards the bin. It missed by a wide margin, landing on the floor and spilling a milky brown puddle. Brandon chuckled and followed suit, his own cup landing beside Chad's. It was a small, pathetic display of dominance. Just then, Maya entered, pushing her cart. Her presence instantly lowered the volume in the room. She didn't look at them. Her focus was on her task, to collect the trash, wipe the counters, and restore order. She moved to the spilled coffee, pulling a cloth from her belt. As she bent down, Chad's voice, dripping with condescension, cut through the air. "Hey, you missed a spot," he pointed with his chin towards a clean section of the floor. "Right over there." Maya stopped. She slowly straightened up and turned her head to look at him. She didn't speak. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, met his. For a split second, Chad felt a strange, unnerving sensation, as if he were being assessed and found wanting. It was a look of such profound stillness, of such absolute neutrality, that it was more unsettling than anger. It was the look of a predator sizing up a lesser creature that wasn't worth the energy to hunt. The feeling passed as quickly as it came, replaced by his own indignation. Who was she to look at him like that? He decided to press the issue. He picked up a half-full water bottle from the counter, unscrewed the cap, and with a deliberate, theatrical motion, poured it onto the floor right in front of her feet. "Oops," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Clumsy me." "Make sure you get that too." Kyle and Brandon snickered, their laughter sounding hollow in the suddenly tense room. Other employees who had been grabbing coffee now stared at their shoes, desperate to be anywhere else. Maya's gaze flickered from the puddle at her feet to Chad's smug face. Her expression didn't change, but something deep behind her eyes shifted. It was a flicker of a fire being banked, a disciplined control being exerted over a powerful and dangerous impulse. She held his gaze for a long, silent moment. Then, she broke eye contact, knelt, and began to wipe up the water with her cloth. She did it with the same methodical calm as before. She wiped up his puddle, then the coffee spill, placed the dirty cloth in a sealed bag on her cart, and picked up their discarded cups from the floor. Without another word or glance, she turned and pushed her cart out of the room. Chad felt a surge of victory. He had asserted his dominance. The janitor had been put in her place. But as he watched her leave, a small, cold seed of doubt remained. He couldn't shake the memory of her eyes. It wasn't fear he had seen. It wasn't anger. It was something else entirely, something ancient and patient. It was the calm before a storm, and he was too arrogant to realize he was standing directly in its path. Maya's apartment was a single room in a rundown building on the far side of the city, a world away from the gleaming towers of downtown. But inside, it was a sanctuary of order. There were no decorations on the walls, no clutter on the surfaces. A single bed was made with meticulous, razor-sharp hospital corners. A small stack of books on philosophy and physics sat perfectly aligned on a simple wooden crate that served as a nightstand. Her few sets of civilian clothes were folded in precise squares inside an open closet. This wasn't just neatness, it was a ritual. It was the physical manifestation of a mind trying to impose structure on a world of chaos. For Maya, order was survival. In the field, a misplaced piece of gear could mean death. A moment of inattention could compromise a mission. She had carried that discipline into this new life, hoping it would build a fortress around her memories. But the memories were persistent ghosts. After her shift, she would sit on the edge of her bed and perform a mental checklist, a habit ingrained from years of post-mission debriefs. She would catalog the day's events, analyzing them for threats, for anomalies. Today, the incident with Chad in the break room registered as a low-level threat, but one with the potential to escalate. She recognized his type instantly. The bully who mistakes kindness for weakness, who requires an audience, and who feeds on the humiliation of others. She had dealt with men like him before, men with guns and men with ideologies, and she knew they only stopped when they met a superior force. Her promise to herself, to remain a ghost, to walk away, was being tested. She opened the bottom drawer of her simple dresser. Inside, nestled amongst a few spare t-shirts, was a small, wooden box. She lifted the lid. On top lay a United States flag, folded into a tight, perfect triangle. Beneath it was a single photograph. It showed a group of 7 figures in desert camouflage, their faces smudged with paint, their bodies laden with gear. They were smiling, a flash of camaraderie in a harsh landscape. Maya was one of them, younger, her eyes bright with a fire that she now worked so hard to conceal. She traced the face of the man next to her, his arm slung around her shoulder. A brother in arms, lost on their final mission together. It was his loss, the cacophony of that final, terrible day, that had driven her here. She had sought peace in the quiet, mundane world, but the world wouldn't cooperate. The arrogance of men like Chad was a discordant note in the symphony of order she was trying to compose. It wasn't just an insult to her, it was an affront to the very principle of respect and discipline she held sacred. She closed the box, the click of the latch echoing in the silent room. She was not a victim. She was not weak. She was a warrior in repose, a storm held in check. But every storm has a breaking point. And as she sat there, the quiet janitor with the soul of a soldier, she knew her carefully constructed peace was fragile, and it was only a matter of time before the world forced her to fight again. The situation at Innovate Dynamics was spiraling. Mr. Harrison, now consumed by his hunt for the mole, had his security team digging into the lives of his senior staff. The atmosphere on the executive floor grew thick with suspicion. Allies of 20 years eyed each other with distrust. The pressure was immense, but the leak was sophisticated. The information being passed to their rival was high level, but it was being transmitted in a way that bypassed all their digital security. Morrison, the security chief, was stumped. It's like the information is just vanishing into thin air and reappearing at our competitor's headquarters, he confessed to Harrison in a hushed, late-night meeting. There's no electronic trail. It has to be low-tech. Someone is either walking out with physical documents or, more likely, using a burner phone or some other non-company device we can't track. Harrison's frustration was palpable. He felt like he was fighting a ghost. While he and his team were focused on the top of the corporate ladder, the real disease was festering below. Chad and his friends, feeling untouchable, had escalated their campaign of petty tyranny. Their new target was Leo, a brilliant but painfully shy software engineer in the R&D department. Leo was a prodigy, a coder who thought in elegant algorithms and beautiful, streamlined logic. He was also socially awkward, stuttered when he was nervous, and preferred the company of a computer screen to people. This made him the perfect victim. Chad had discovered that Leo was the lead developer on a new, groundbreaking piece of software, an internal logistics program that could revolutionize their supply chain management. It was exactly the kind of innovative project that could earn a junior executive a major promotion. So they began a campaign of psychological warfare. They would accidentally delete his code, forcing him to work late into the night to recover it. They would mock his stutter in meetings, disguised as impatient interruptions. And most insidiously, they started stealing his ideas. During team updates, Chad would present Leo's concepts as his own, using his confident delivery to mask the theft. Leo, terrified of confrontation, would just sit there, his face pale, unable to speak up. Maya saw it all. Her cleaning route took her past the R&D department every night. She saw Leo, working alone, his face illuminated by the glow of his monitor, looking exhausted and defeated. She saw Chad and his cronies leaving the area, laughing and patting each other on the back. She started to notice a pattern. Chad's group would often be in the office late, but not at their own desks. They would loiter near R&D, near the legal department, places where sensitive information was accessible. They used their status as a cloak, their presence unquestioned. She saw them huddled in a corner, speaking in low voices, one of them often holding a small, secondary phone she recognized as a burner. Her training kicked in, not the combat training, but the intelligence gathering. She started observing, cataloging their movements, their habits, the times they were present when no one else was. She wasn't looking for a corporate mole. She was simply identifying a threat. In her mind, the bullies and the traitors were one and the same. They were a disruption to the order. And she was beginning to compile a silent, detailed report in her head, a file on the enemy hiding in plain sight. Mr. Harrison's desperation led him to an unconventional strategy. His high-tech security had failed. His trusted executives were either compromised or incompetent. He decided to rely on the oldest intelligence-gathering tool in the world, his own eyes. He began to walk the floors of Innovate Dynamics at all hours, especially late at night. He told his staff he was inspiring the night owls, but in reality, he was hunting. He moved silently through the darkened corridors, a well-dressed ghost in his own machine, observing the handful of employees working late. He was looking for anything out of place, a hushed phone call, a furtive glance, a meeting that seemed too coincidental. His presence was unnerving to those who saw him, a silent, judging specter gliding through their domain. One evening, he was on the 4th floor, home to the Research and Development Department, when he saw the young coder, Leo, hunched over his keyboard, his face a mask of intense concentration. Harrison was about to move on when he saw Chad, Kyle, and Brandon appear at the far end of the corridor. They weren't supposed to be on this floor, their department was 2 levels up. They moved with a predatory confidence that set Harrison's teeth on edge. He instinctively stepped back into the shadows of a darkened alcove, his curiosity piqued. He watched as the trio approached Leo's cubicle. Chad leaned against the partition, his arms crossed. "Working late, Leo. Trying to fix the mess you made in the morning presentation." Leo flinched. I didn't make a mess. The data was corrupted, right?" "Corrupted," Chad sneered. "Listen, we know you're close to cracking the final module on that new logistics program. The one I'm presenting to the board next week. I need access to your drive. Give me the password." Leo shook his head, his hands trembling. "I can't. It's against protocol. It's my project." Brandon stepped forward, looming over Leo's chair. "It's the company's project. And Chad is your superior. Are you being insubordinate?" From his hiding spot, Harrison felt a surge of cold anger. This was what his company had become. A playground for thugs in suits. At that exact moment, the quiet hum of a cleaning cart's wheels grew louder. Maya turned the corner, her movements as quiet and deliberate as always. She was on her nightly route. She saw the scene immediately, the 3 larger men cornering the smaller one, the palpable fear in the air. She stopped her cart. Her training screamed at her. Multiple hostiles, 1 unarmed civilian. Assess, engage, neutralize. But her promise to herself whispered back. Walk away. It's not your fight. For a long, agonizing moment, she was frozen between the two opposing forces of her nature, the warrior and the pacifist. She watched as Chad reached down and gripped Leo's shoulder, his knuckles white. "I'm not asking again, that was it." The line had been crossed. The decision was made for her. The promise of peace was a luxury she could no longer afford. She took a slow, silent breath, centering herself. She left her cart behind and began to walk towards them, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. Mr. Harrison, still hidden in the alcove, held his breath. He saw the janitor approaching and thought, "Oh no, don't get involved." He was about to step out, to end this himself, but something in the woman's posture made him pause. There was a change in her, a shift in energy so profound it was almost visible. The ghost was gone. Someone else was walking in her shoes. "Let him go." Maya's voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the tension like a razor. It held no fear, no pleading, only a flat, calm command. Chad, Kyle, and Brandon turned in unison, their expressions a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Chad let go of Leo's shoulder and straightened up, a contemptuous smirk spreading across his face. "Well, look what we have here." The cleaning lady, coming to the rescue, he took a step towards her, puffing out his chest in a classic display of intimidation. "What are you going to do? Mop us to death?" Kyle and Brandon chuckled, moving to flank him, forming a wall of arrogance. "This doesn't concern you," Chad said, his voice dropping in a poor imitation of a menacing tone. "Go back to your trash." Maya didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Chad, her expression still unnervingly neutral. "I said, let him go. Leave this floor." Now the sheer audacity of her command enraged Chad. All his privilege, his title, his self-proclaimed superiority were being challenged by a janitor. In his mind, it was an intolerable insult. He was going to make an example of her. "You know what," he said, stepping right into her personal space. "You need to learn your place." He shoved her. It wasn't a playful push, it was a violent, angry shove with two hands, meant to humiliate and dominate. He put his weight into it, expecting her to stumble backward, to cry out, to fall in a heap. Maya's body went with the force of the push, but her feet seemed to move with a preternatural grace. Her backward step was too smooth, too controlled. Her heel caught the edge of her own cleaning cart, the one she had left positioned perfectly behind her, and she went down. But she didn't fall. She dropped. It was a flawless breakfall, a technique drilled into her through thousands of repetitions. She landed on the hard floor with a soft thud, absorbing the impact through the muscles of her back and legs, her head never coming close to the ground. She rolled with the momentum and came to a stop on her side. To Chad, it looked like he had knocked her down with ease. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "See? That's what happens when you..." He never finished the sentence. From the end of the hall, Mr. Harrison watched in horror and disbelief. He had seen the shove, the fall. A wave of fury and shame washed over him. This was happening in his company. He started to move, to shout, to intervene. But then he saw it. He saw the way she got up. It wasn't the clumsy scramble of a person who had been knocked over. It was a single, fluid, economical movement. One moment she was on the floor, the next she was on her feet, rising as if pulled by an invisible string. And everything about her had changed. The hood of her jumpsuit had fallen back, revealing her face fully for the first time. Her eyes, which had been so placid and empty, were now blazing with a focused, chilling intensity. The quiet, invisible janitor was gone. In her place stood a weapon, coiled and ready. The air in the corridor crackled with a sudden, terrifying shift in power. Chad, Kyle, and Brandon felt it too. Their laughter died in their throats. They had knocked down a janitor. A Navy SEAL had just stood up. The moment stretched, thick and silent. Chad, Kyle, and Brandon stared at the transformed woman before them, their bravado evaporating like mist. They saw not a janitor but a predator. Their pack instincts took over. Fear turned to aggression. "You're gonna regret that," Chad stammered, trying to reclaim his authority. He and his two friends surged forward, a clumsy, uncoordinated rush of flailing limbs and misplaced confidence. What happened next was not a fight. A fight implies a contest, a struggle between two sides. This was a demonstration. It was the surgical application of physics and anatomy, executed with breathtaking speed and efficiency. Kyle was in the lead. He threw a wild, telegraph punch. Maya didn't dodge it. She flowed inside it, her body moving like water around a rock. Her left hand met his incoming wrist, not to block it, but to guide it, redirecting its momentum. Her right hand, open-palmed, struck the nerve cluster on the side of his neck. It wasn't a hit, it was a precise tap. Kyle's eyes went wide with shock, his entire right side went numb, and his legs buckled. He crumpled to the floor, not unconscious but completely incapacitated, a puppet with its strings cut. Brandon, coming from her right, tried to grab her. Maya pivoted on the ball of her foot, a movement so quick it was almost a blur. As he lunged past, she caught his extended arm, spun with his own momentum, and dropped her weight. A textbook joint lock. There was a sickening pop as his shoulder was dislocated, not broken but expertly unseated. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pain and surprise, and fell to his knees, clutching his useless arm. 2 down. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. Chad froze, his mind unable to process what he had just witnessed. He stared at his two friends on the floor, then back at Maya, who was now standing directly in front of him, her breathing perfectly calm, her stance balanced and relaxed. She hadn't even broken a sweat. All his life, Chad's power had come from his father's name, his money, his title. He had never faced a consequence he couldn't talk or buy his way out of. Now he was facing a power that was pure and absolute, and it terrified him to his core. He raised his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Okay, calm down. It was a joke. Maya took one step forward. Her hand shot out, not in a punch, but with her fingers extended. She didn't hit his face. She pressed her thumb firmly into the pressure point, just below his jawline. An excruciating, paralyzing pain shot through Chad's entire body. His vision swam. His knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the floor, gasping and twitching, a whimpering mess. It was over. 3 men, neutralized without a single closed fist punch thrown. There was no brutality, only a terrifying, clinical efficiency. From the shadows, Mr. Harrison watched, his jaw slack, his mind reeling. He had seen violence, he had seen fights, but he had never seen anything like this. It was like watching a master artisan at work. Maya stood for a moment, the apex predator in a silent jungle, her chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. Then, the warrior receded. She turned to Leo, who was huddled by his desk, his eyes wide with terror and awe. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft again. "Are you okay?" Leo could only nod, speechless. Maya then turned her head slowly, her gaze sweeping the corridor, and her eyes locked directly with Mr. Harrison's, still standing in the dark alcove. She knew he'd been there the whole time. Their eyes met across the space, and in that moment of shared understanding, everything changed forever. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Security was called, but not for Maya. They arrived to find Chad, Kyle, and Brandon being attended to by paramedics for a dislocated shoulder, and what the medics confusingly described as severe, temporary neuromuscular shock. Mr. Harrison took charge, his voice ringing with a newfound authority he hadn't felt in years. He personally escorted the trio out of the building, informing them their employment was terminated, effective immediately. "This is not who we are," he said, his voice cold as steel, as they were led away. An internal investigation was launched, but it was a short one. Terrified of further consequences, Leo found his voice. He provided a detailed account of the bullying and idea theft. And Maya, in a brief, private conversation with Harrison, calmly detailed her observations of the trio's suspicious late-night activities and their use of burner phones. They weren't just bullies, Mr. Harrison, she stated simply. They were sloppy. Careless. People like that always are. Her quiet intelligence, combined with Leo's testimony, led Harrison's security team to a new line of inquiry. Within 48 hours, they had uncovered the whole scheme. Chad, desperate to fund a lifestyle beyond his means, had been using his access to photograph sensitive documents and sell them to their rival. He was the mole. The billion-dollar leak wasn't a sophisticated cyber attack, it was the result of simple, arrogant greed. The next day, Maya was called to the top floor. She entered the CEO's office, the same vast, intimidating room he had paced in just days before. He wasn't behind his desk. He was standing by the window, looking down at the city. He turned as she entered. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. He didn't sit opposite her, but took the chair beside her. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice earnest. "Not just for what happened last night, but for allowing a culture to grow in my company where something like that could happen. I was so focused on the view from up here, I forgot to look at what was happening on the ground." He paused, looking at her directly. "I won't ask you about your past. That is your business. But I saw what you did. I saw discipline. I saw courage. And I saw someone who, when faced with injustice, did not walk away. That is a character trait that is more valuable than any degree or title." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "I have a problem, Maya. My company is sick. It's infected with arrogance and a lack of integrity. I've been trying to fix it with security protocols and corporate oversight, but I've been fighting the symptoms, not the disease. The disease is a lack of character." He stood up and walked back to his desk, picking up a folder. "I'm creating a new position. Director of Corporate Integrity and Personnel Security. It's not about watching cameras or running background checks. It's about rebuilding the character of this company. It's about protecting our people, like Leo, and ensuring that strength is measured by integrity, not by a title. I don't want a security guard. I want a guardian. I want you." Maya looked from the folder to his face. She had come here seeking invisibility, a quiet corner of the world where she could be left alone. But the world had found her. And it was offering her not a place to hide, but a place to stand. A place where her unique skills could be used not for destruction, but for protection. For order. A new kind of mission. She looked at Mr. Harrison, and for the first time in a long time, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. She had finally found a war she could win, and a peace she could build herself. True strength isn't about the power you have, but how you choose to use it. It's not found in a loud voice but in a quiet character. And heroes, real heroes, are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment they are needed most. They are the ones who clean up the messes, who see the things others ignore, and who stand up for those who can't. So look around you. The person you underestimate today might be the one who saves you tomorrow. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that there is incredible strength in quiet people. And never, ever, judge a person by the uniform they wear.